to Pioneer Hybrids, Johnston, Iowa, where he worked in various international finance roles, taking him to over 40 countries during his 14-year career. His last position was with Pioneer, was Director of Finance for European operations, which included living in Europe for 3 years. Bill's job, the first time around with the National Pork Board, was as Chief Financial Officer for 3 years. He then moved on to work for Smithfield's Hog Production, Western Operation Division for 7 years as Director of Analysis and Development. In this role, Bill led the production and financial analysis functions, continuous improvement program, and employee development. Bill rejoined the National Pork Board in 2011 as Vice President of Producer and Industry Relations, where he oversees the producer and state outreach functions, as well as the certification of education programs offered by the Checkoff. Bill also services as administrator for the U.S. Pork Center of Excellence. So, welcome, Bill.
Thanks, Russ. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for staying with me this afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here in Nebraska. I was telling a few people today that yesterday I was in a planning meeting in Des Moines, where I'm based, with our leadership team that was an 11-hour straight meeting. So the best thing I could do was hit the road, have a little drive here to Nebraska, and actually have an opportunity to spend time here with you today. Congratulations to all of you for being here and for the organizers of this event. I think this is a fabulous opportunity to create awareness and information for folks to think about getting into the pork industry. And as everyone has said, Nebraska is absolutely a wonderful place for the expansion of the industry. And I'm going to talk a little bit about what's really driving, not specifically why it's great for Nebraska, but just why it's great for us as a pork industry. So I'm going to talk a little bit today about just a few topics. One, just kind of a snapshot of the industry and how exciting of a time it is, because if you choose to be a part of this industry, you are part of a growing industry. And I'm going to talk a little bit about why that is and where that's happening and why that's a sustainable going into the future. I'm also going to talk about our We Care ethical principles, and so for some of you that may be new, but it's a great tool for us to be able to talk about with our friends and neighbors about the sustainability and how, and some of the priorities that we set as an industry, which you would all become a part of, which you would be a part of, and I think it really gives you some good talking points for you when you're talking about it with your friends and your neighbors, if you should proceed to get involved. Then I'm going to talk about the big boogeyman in the room that everybody's probably heard of, whether you're in pork production or not. You've probably heard about ASF, or African swine fever. And so African swine fever either has the opportunity to be the biggest opportunity for us as an industry, probably that we could point to over the last few decades, or it could be one of the most devastating things that happen to us if it actually gets here. So I'm going to talk just a little bit about what we're doing to try to keep that from the preventive things we're trying to do to keep it from getting here, but also some of the, if it should get here, what can we do to try to mitigate it or to minimize it. And then finally, I work for the National Pork Board, so that's the National Pork Checkoff. And so our charge is to do three things. It's to promote the product, it's to conduct research on behalf of the industry, and it's to communicate and provide communication and education to consumers and producers. And so one of the biggest areas of our budget is talking about demand enhancement and how we try to move that product, and I want to give you just a little idea about what's going on there, some of the things we do that's actually helping to drive this growth that we're seeing in the industry. So a snapshot real quick. You can see this is the latest information that came from the U.S. Hog and Pigs report, literally across every category of pigs on the farm. We're up 4% year over year in terms of just the size of the U.S. Pork industry. The pig crop's up 4%, hogs Market hog inventory at 69.1 million, up 4%. Breeding herd up 1%. So we've actually seen a little bit of slowing down in terms of just the breeding herd from what we've seen over the last couple of years. So we don't see as many new sow farms, but we're certainly continuing to see increasing growth in the number of finishing sites. It's also important just to think about and have in the back of your mind what you're really becoming a part of. What is this opportunity in terms of the pork industry? Just if you think about it from a U.S. national perspective, we generate over $67.7 billion in downstream revenue. We employ 550,000 jobs across the U.S. And we are one of the biggest exporters of ag products in the United States. And so while we have been negatively impacted by tariffs and some of the challenges as we've tried to get things on a more level basis in terms of with our trading partners, I can also tell you that in spite of those tariffs, because you and us, we are the lowest cost producer in the world, in spite of those tariffs, people will still buy the product with the tariff because it's cheaper than where they can get it elsewhere. So these are tremendous opportunities, tremendous times. You'll see from these numbers that we are heavily dependent on exports. Over 26, nearly 26%. We actually can forecast and see that growth continuing to go as high as 35 or 40% over the next few years, mostly because pork is the #1 protein in the world. So it's #3 in the U.S., it's #1 in the world. And so when we continue to see the growth in the population that is forecast going towards 2040 and 2050, the opportunity for us to export our great, safe, good tasting, low cost product around the world will only continue to grow. There will also be some enhanced opportunities here in the U.S., and I'll talk about that a little bit later. The other thing that we've got, so we've seen that sow herd kind of slow down a little bit, but part of that is we're also continuing to see, look at that steady growth. Probably can't see all of the, from 1964 through 2017, the increase in pigs per litter or pounds per sow produced. That's what this particular one is. And so you continue to see that with increasing litter sizes, as well as continuing to market even larger pigs and being able to do that cost effectively, we've really seen a wonderful continuous improvement, that steady improvement just in terms of productivity, which continues to drive that low-cost producer messages. The other side of that is somebody's got to eat it, right? And so one of the other pieces that's really good to show is this is U.S. meat per capita availability. And so what do we eat across the country? So if you look, pork is blue, beef is red, broilers are green, turkeys are purple on the top. You can see that into the projection for 2019 that we're really getting back up to the Atkins craze in terms of just the total amount of protein being consumed in the U.S. So just short of 220 pounds annually per year of meat consumed. And that number for pork is projected to be just over 52 pounds. And I'll show some slides again later where we're seeing that number actually moving again in a positive direction just in terms of pork share of the U.S. consumption. So that's the industry snapshot, right? Got plenty of pigs, we're continuing to grow, and we've got great markets for it to be able to be sold into, okay? So those are kind of the big messages. One of the most important things that we're facing today is a consumer who's greatly different than probably what some of the guys that look like me in this room are, right? In terms of where they get their information, the questions they ask about their food, what they want to know about it, this issue of sustainability. Have you all, show of hands, everybody heard the word sustainability, right? Everybody's concerned about where my food comes from. Are you doing the right things by the planet? Are you doing the right things by the pig, right? Our customers, right, the retail and food service industry is really pushing the pork industry as well as all the other commodity groups to tell your story about how you're being sustainable, what sustainability means to you as an industry, and how can you help me communicate with my consumer about your commitment to that sustainability. So we've had this We Care ethical principles around 11 years now, It's an emblem I hope you recognize. Most all of the producers who exist in Nebraska and work with Nebraska Pork and others will talk and have this logo. I wear it on my shirt. It's widely adapted. It's widely recognized. It is completely respected by our customers because of our commitment to do what's right each and every day. And this message has only become more important over the past 10 years. The future of our success will be minimizing the risk of negative influences. We all know that there's plenty of folks out there that have a lot of trouble about the way that we produce protein today, right? And in particular, and pork is not insulated from that challenge. We need to continue to increase the trust and confidence in what we do and how we do it, and growing demand is critical for us both in the U.S. and abroad. So this ability to utilize this We Care message, and this slide basically points out very simply, the 6 ethical commitments that we've made as an industry to communicate our commitment to continuous improvement, as well as really being able to share with them our story about why they should feel really good about buying U.S. pork. So this We Care platform really creates this incredible opportunity for us to really communicate our commitment to sustainability and doing what's right in the modern production of pork here in the United States. And so when we go out and we talk with retailers and food service folks, they talk with us about their environmental concerns, right? Water quality, air, greenhouse gas, soil health. They talk about social issues, which is the more current one that's really, environmental really kind of led the way, animal well-being, animal welfare led the way, but now we're seeing a lot more focus on social issues as well, right? So are you paying a living wage? Are your workers in the farms able to work safely? What's the impact on rural communities? These are more current societal issues that are being asked by our customers. And then, probably most importantly, and where we're really headed in the future, is they want metrics, right? And they want you to be able to tell them not just the story, but actually show them that you're making a difference, right? What's the way to actually show that improvement? And fortunately for us, we've got some great ways to be able to do that for our industry. One of those is we did a 55-year look back on through life cycle management, through looking at just what has changed about the pork industry over the last 55 years. These measures are extremely effective for us in talking with the customer and for the customer with their consumer. If you look at over the last 55 years in terms of modern pork production, our land use has gone down 80%, water use 25%, energy use 7%, and our carbon footprint has been reduced just short of 8%. So these are really great messages for us to be able to share, and the fact that we continually work to improve on each one of them, and we can demonstrate our success in continuing to move that bar in terms of not only where are we at, but where are we going in the future. One of the really important things that doesn't get covered enough, or isn't a piece of information that should be shared, or I'd really encourage you all to take away, is when people talk with you about pork production is a significant contributor to greenhouse gas emissions in the United States. You tell them that pork production contributes 0.3% of the greenhouse gas emissions in the United States. Greenhouse gas emissions is not a problem in the pork industry. There was some data long ago, or several years ago, that really pointed out that livestock was a significant contributor. There was subsequent information that said that that was wrong. But that message never got out. So people have this message in their mind that animal production is a significant contributor. It's not in the pork industry. It's not the others either. So the number was greatly overstated. And keep that number in mind when people ask you, or should ask you that question. 0.3% greenhouse gas emissions in the United States come from pork production. So we've also got some other, so what's the signs of the things that we continue to do? So we have a coalition with the National Corn Growers and the United Soybean Board, along with a friendly group, a reasonably friendly NGO or activist group called the Environmental Defense Fund, who is working with us in a collaboration to really demonstrate how manure actually is contributing positively to soil health, and so utilizing not only our dollars but also our key partners in soybean and corn to actually continue to demonstrate our commitment and how we're continuing to identify new technologies and more effective ways to use the manure that actually enhances the soil health on the farm. On social issues, right, so I talked about that concern about employees. One of the biggest things that we've done this year is we've actually started to roll up all of that give back that goes on across the country by all of our great producers in terms of their contributions back to their community. Our producers tend to be in rural communities. They tend to be big supporters. They volunteer hours. They donate pork. They contribute money to keeping our rural communities alive. This year in 2018, we just a couple weeks ago put together that in a survey of our farmers, just during 2018 alone, over 3.2 million servings of pork were donated, over 55,000 hours of their time over the last 6 years volunteering, and over $5.5 million in the last year alone in contributions to charitable causes. Those are really powerful messages for us to share, again, about the social responsibility that your pork industry takes and can be communicated to our customers. The last thing I want to say about We Care, and just talk about that a little bit about this area of sustainability, is that later this year you'll see that we'll actually put out a sustainability report for the pork industry that can be used widely. There'll be a lot of great information that could be those nuggets that you need to talk in your local community or with legislators or other influencers in your communities that talk about sustainability of the industry, all the summarization of all these different things that we're doing. So watch for that. And then also on the right there, you'll see a website called porkcares.org. So sometimes we feel really uncomfortable about talking about what we do, right? And defending. And sometimes we're not very confident about being able to defend what we do, and it's just because we know we're doing the right thing, we don't have the right words. Porkcares.org has all the information you could ever want to be able to help defend the choices you make and the decisions that you make and the reasons we do things today in modern pork production. So I really encourage you to look at porkcares.org as a great resource for you to be more confident when you talk in your local communities about why you're getting involved in pork production or why you already are. And it's just a wealth of great information for you about our industry. Finally, on this topic, I think the thing that we really go back to, the principles, which were the ethical principles of We Care, the practices that we do every day. If you're new in the industry, you'll hear about PQA, pork quality assurance. You'll hear about transport quality assurance. You'll hear about third-party audits. Those are all demonstration of our commitment to the practices, and then the results being the proof that actually helps us build this public trust. That's what we're attempting to do. That's what the We Care program is doing for us, and that's really our commitment to the public as we go forward. So continue to, again, think about porkcares.org, continue to think about the We Care program and how you could use that with your employees and in your local community to really have them get on board with us with expanding in a local community or in this state. I want to stop just real quickly before I go on to African swine fever and just talk about the way that the organizations work across the U.S., just in case you were unaware. On the left-hand side, Russ mentioned that he's part of the National Pork Producers Council. The National Pork Producers Council is your industry organization that does all the lobbying, legislating, policy, influencing in Washington, D.C. and at the state level. So NPPC is voluntarily funded by producers from across the United States as well as allied industry. That voluntary contribution is set at 10 cents per $100 of value of a market hog sold, and those funds are actually typically collected at the packing plant and typically paid by the producers who own the pigs. But there's also an opportunity in that program for contract growers to be a part of that program as well. You can learn more about that from Russ or from Al Junkie and the Northeast and the Nebraska pork staff here in terms of how you could become a part of that. So they do all the legislating and lobbying act. I'm part of this big wheel over on the farther right side, the pork checkoff. That's a mandatory checkoff. That's a national checkoff. Every pork producer owns a pig. When they market it, 40 cents of every $100 is withheld, or should be withheld when they sell that, and it comes back to the national office, and then we actually distribute 20% of those funds back to the state associations like you have here in Nebraska, and the rest is at the national level where we execute these programs around promoting the product, doing research, and providing consumer information and education. So the in-between is the state organization. So they're the nuts and bolts that kind of hold it together. They're the ones who you can have the most direct contact with. They're the ones who really guide a lot of what we do at the national level because they're able to have that one-on-one relationship with you as producers and tell us what are the things that are happening in the local communities, what are the things that we need. So those state associations are really the grassroots effort that not only we need from a checkoff side, but also MPPC needs from the side of making sure that producers get to Washington, D.C. and to the Capitol in Lincoln and make sure that their voices are heard. So I encourage you, if you're not involved or haven't been involved at the state level, to really consider that as a first step in being involved. And then obviously there's, like Russ has done with MPPC, and Bill Lucky is on the National Pork Board of Directors, so there's lots of opportunities at the national level as well. So I encourage you to get involved and give back on behalf of this industry. So, move on from there. Talk about the boogeyman, ASF, okay? Prevention and preparedness. So, this first slide just talks about, I don't want to go through what each one of these functions are, but I just want to try to do it to demonstrate the level of focus that has been given since August of last year when we first found out that African swine fever was in China. So, the reason we got so concerned at that point was because when we had PEDV come to the United States, we know that it came from China. And then it most likely came in through feed ingredients that we brought in from China to the United States. So if that happened on PED and now China's got ASF, that was a big thing. That was a moment in the sand. There's plenty of other parts of the world where there's ASF has existed, but never where in such a big country where we know we were bringing in things and we had so much risk as we did with China. So since that time, this just demonstrates the number of different task force organizations, the coalition that's come together between the Pork Board, MPPC, state associations, the American Association of Swine Veterinarians, working with the USDA, working with state vets to try to do everything we can to prevent this disease from getting to the U.S. We know that feed is one of the biggest risks that we have. Most of our minerals, vitamins, a lot of the supplements that we use come in from China. So we knew that we needed to make that a top priority, not only for us as an industry, but also for the AFIA, which represents all the feed manufacturers, but also to really make that effort, to insist on additional effort from the USDA in this area as well. And so a lot of our focus has really been in this area of feed. The one that at the bottom there that I want to highlight is the one that goes beyond prevention and goes to what do we do if we actually have an event, and how do we, if you're aware of the high path disease that we had in flocks a few years ago in Minnesota and in parts of the upper Midwest. It's one thing to mass depop birds, it's another thing to mass depop 300-pound market hogs. And so there's a lot of unknowns and a lot of things that we don't know yet about what's really the best way to do that. And so we are working very hard on trying to make sure that if we do have to do some sort of mass depop in the event that we actually get that disease here in the country, what's the way that we can do that most effectively. And again, just some of those more information about exactly what it takes. to make sure that feed, particularly the ingredients, are safe. We've had great cooperation. Most all of our ingredients now are being held for the number of days or the number of weeks that it takes to make sure that even if the disease was there, that it would no longer be active. And again, we're also looking at a lot and testing a lot of mitigants, so things that could be added to the feed, formaldehyde-based and others that would actually help kill that disease if it was in part of the feed manufacturing process. And there's a lot of really good promise around that area that we're doing that research. So preparedness, this is just a list of some of the things we're doing to be prepared. Here's the things that I'd like you to be aware of and that most of the pork producers across the country are actually working on. It's called Secure Pork Supply Plan. The Secure Pork Supply Plan you can find at secureporkplan.org. It takes you through all the steps you need to be aware of, that if we should have the event of a program disease like African swine fever, what are the things that you will need to have in place for your state veterinarian to allow pigs to move off your farm. So if you weren't aware, in the event of a foreign animal disease like African swine fever, the first time it's identified in our country, all movements across the country, irregardless of where it was found, will stop for 72 hours. So think about that for a moment. Not only will the pigs stop moving, but you won't be delivering feed. You won't be bringing on, there won't be any activity. Really, it will just be at a standstill, okay? You can imagine how quickly that could become an issue once you get to, on a sow farm, if you get to 72 days and you can't wean pigs and move them off site. How long can you hold nursery pigs? How cold, you all know how many pigs we move each and every day and how critical it is that we're able to move them when they need to be able to be moved. So what we need producers to do is that after that holding period is over, that they've done everything they can to be able to convince their state veterinarian, who will be in charge, about, hey, I'm okay, I've done all of these things, allow me to move my pigs to market, allow me to move my pigs to my nursery or my finisher. And so there's some really basic, really good steps around Secure Pork Supply Plan, and I can just run through them real quick. Prem IDs. Our industry has a great experience of actually having Prem IDs for each site. If you don't have one, make sure you have one, and then make sure that it's accurate, right? Some of these Prem IDs have been around a long time, and when they were done, maybe it moved across, maybe you moved it, maybe it burned down and you built across the road. They may not be accurate. So make sure your Prem IDs are correct and they have all the correct information. Second, make sure that Prem ID is tied to every movement that you have on your farm, and make sure that the Prem ID is on any testing that you have done by a diagnostic lab, okay? That Prem ID will be the basis from which that state veterinarian will be confident enough to allow you to move pigs. So those are really the critical, and then finally, having an enhanced biosecurity plan. So most of our sites today have biosecurity plans. If you're working for a integrator or somebody, they probably have already talked about or thought about those things. That enhanced biosecurity plan is more than just what it takes to get into the farm. It's about what part of the farm for delivery is considered clean, what part is considered dirty, what is your process for who's allowed on the farm, who's not allowed on the farm. It's just a more detailed biosecurity plan than what probably most of our systems have had prior to this threat. So again, if you're working with an integrator, they're probably already working on this. If you're an independent producer, you'll want to make sure that you're prepared with this. SecurePorkPlan.org is the place to go to find the information. That will be the quickest path back to being able to move pigs off of your farm. So again, this is a lot of lists about, this is really just really to emphasize the number of different things that are being done in terms of helping prepare across the U.S. And so I'm going to move on from there. Be happy to take questions afterwards, but I'm going to just talk a little bit about marketing. And so that's a big part of what we do at the National Pork Board. It's probably where about 2/3 of the funding that comes into the National Pork Board gets spent is in promoting our product. Some really good information that's been going on here. This is a chart that shows from 1990 through 2019 what the first quarter consumption of pork was in terms of per capita, and you can see that year over year that number's up 4% this year, and if that 2019 number actually goes back and equals about where we were last at in 2004. So you can see where there was been kind of a dip over time in first quarter consumption, and we've seen a really nice move upwards in that. And the other thing is that that doesn't include Easter for the first quarter, because that was in April. So there's some really positive trends you can see here this year in terms of where we're going in terms of just domestic consumption of pork. We can also see that demand is up again in the first quarter of 19, up 4.6%. That goes right along with that per capita consumption of 4.9%. So we have a lot of positive movement in terms of what's going on here domestically. So there was a pretty fundamental shift that was made 2 years ago in the pork industry. If you would have looked historically, since the mandatory checkoff was put in place in 1985, we had been doing pretty much the same thing throughout that whole period in terms of our model. We were doing a lot of generic advertising. We were in a lot of magazines. We were talking about pork, the other white meat, and we were doing a lot of traditional type of marketing, okay? Billboards on the road, maybe some ads on TV or in newspapers or magazines, right? But today, 2 years ago, it became readily apparent, especially from those numbers, right, that our message wasn't really getting through. And today people get their information from a much different place than what historically we did, or certainly back in 1985. So if you think about that, where do you get most of your information? Guess what? That's where everybody gets their information. Google says that people look at their cell phones 150 times a day on average. So if you don't do that, congratulations, you haven't been sucked in, but maybe some of you are even worse. I might be. If the light flashes, I look, right? So this is where people get their information. This is the digital age. This is where we need to be to promote our product, because this is where they go to find the recipe, where they find nutritional information. This is where they're making their choices from. And so it became very apparent that we needed to change our approach with our new with our consumers as we go forward. So 2 years ago, we moved into working very extensively with Google, right? Everything you've heard about Google, right? They know when you talk about something. I don't know if that part's true, but I guarantee you that it's worse than you think in terms of what they know about you when it comes to Google, right? The age of information and what this #1 search engine in the world has in terms of information about our consumers is really incredible. And so while there's scary things about that, they're incredible partners for us to be able to really give targeted messages to consumers across the U.S. So this search piece of Google is very important. But then the other thing that we've discovered is that young people, particularly millennials, Gen Z, they love watching videos, right? It's all about YouTube. Give them a 30-second video that catches their attention, they hang around and watch it, and there's people that they follow, right? These influencers that have millions of folks who follow these individuals who talk about their life, right? Families, and there's just their daily life. And so we have this opportunity through Google to actually have those folks actually promote a pork message. The #1 thing that we worked on the first year we did this was 145 degrees. You're probably aware, right? We overcook pork, but if you cook it to 145 and give it a 3-minute rest, it's going to be a little bit pink. It's still going to be juicy. It's going to be a great product. 145 was the message that we utilized with several of these Google folks, these YouTube influencers that have millions of followers. And so what were some of the results of that? A third of all of our pork.org visitors, right, that come to our website came from these search ads that we did with Google. 10.2 million impressions via paid search ads, 882,000 clicks to pork.org via paid search ads, probably 3 times any previous history number that we had ever got in terms of just clicking through to pork.org. More importantly, 107 million 30-second reviews on video ads. So these videos are typically 30 seconds long. They cost about 3 seconds a view, but 107 million, and that's of the ones who actually stayed on for the 30 seconds, right? So many people will leave, right? But we had 107 million people, or 107 million views, not necessarily unique people, but 107 million views of those 30-second messages about 145. And 14.4 million views of partnered influencer videos, right? So with 80.5 million minutes of watch time. I can't tell you how much more effective that is in terms of delivering our message than a generic set of advertising in a magazine or a newspaper on a billboard. And bringing them to actually a cause to action. And then because of what Google knows afterwards, 46.1% positive to negative engagement. 46 positive to every one negative reaction to those videos, right? The ones who click and say thumbs up or thumbs down, right? So incredibly effective way for us to deliver that message. $4.7 million to do that effort. We would probably have spent more than twice that in our old traditional days of advertising with not nearly anywhere close to those types of results. So this has been an incredibly effective tool. This move to the digital environment for getting our information out. We also did a lot of in-depth research, more in-depth research than probably any other commodity industry has ever done in 2018. Actually following along with what people put in their shopping carts, right? This was people who were paid money, who contributed their Hy-Vee receipt every week, took a picture of it, it got accumulated with data, and it actually tracked what was their actual purchase habits over an extended period of time. 10,000 U.S. consumers participated in that. We had receipt data from 300,000 panel shoppers, and this gives you surveys are one thing, but when they actually demonstrate how they actually spend their money, it's a much better measure. And so we learned an incredible amount of information about what decisions producers are making at the grocery store and in the restaurants. And it resulted in 2 reports that we've generated this year. Dinner at Home in America, which identified what are the trends that are going on in terms of how people are consuming pork at home, both for lunch and dinner. And also in May, all about dining out, which was what are the trends in terms of the decisions and choices that producers are making when they go out to eat. This type of information is never been done before within the protein industry. Our customers are flocking to this information so that they can figure out how to respond to it and how to have better menu items, as well as organize their meat case and the things they put around their meat case in terms of moving pork and enhancing their profitability. These have really been great first steps, first looks out of that research that we conducted last year. And then remember I mentioned about the future of domestic marketing or domestic consumption of pork, a Hispanic segment report release coming out in October of 2019. Here's why we should all get really excited about the future of pork in the U.S. Over the course of the next 25 years, the Hispanic population in the U.S. will be higher than the white population in the U.S., okay? That's the kind of growth that we have there. The Asian population in the U.S. will continue to grow. The African American population grows a bit, but not that much, right? But this growth in the Hispanic and Asian markets, right, is critical because they love pork. They come from countries and from cultures that eat pork, that make pork the #1 consumed protein in the world. So imagine our opportunity with that increased diversity in our population to be able to continue that tradition of what their background and what their culture has led them to, for us to hold them as consumers of pork as they come to the U.S. and as they are a part of the U.S. Consumer base. So this is why we are so excited about the research that we're doing in terms of what do we need to do to be able to hold those ethnic communities' interest in our product. The opportunity is immense, And that's why not only here domestically, but also obviously what we can move of our product internationally, I think will only continue to enhance our opportunity for growth of our industry here in the U.S. And so, with that, I will stop. Thank you for your attention. I'd be happy to take a question or two if you have them. Rod.
Thanks for coming, Bill. Would you just talk, with H1N1, right, we had swine flu in the news.
Yep.
Right? I know that there's a plan for consumer confidence, marketing plan.
Yes.
Can you describe that a little bit in the case of ASF?
Yes.
And also just comment on, we understand if there's an outbreak of ASF in this country, we're going to have to address the consumer's confidence, right? Is there anything that's being done at the consumer level today, incrementally pushing us toward helping the consumer understand that? Or is it just too early to do that?
Great question, Rod. So it's not too early, and we're starting that messaging, but we're not breaking into jail either, okay? So, and I'll explain that a little bit more. We've done the research with consumers about so first of all, you should all know and always be clear that African swine fever is only a disease for pigs. It doesn't impact the human, right? There's no risk for human consumption of the meat. So pure and simple. But when we explain in research that we've done with consumers about African swine fever, and we tell them that there's absolutely no risk for them to eat it, but then you ask them the question, well, if just out of precaution, do you think it should be taken out of the market for a period of time, just to be safe, right? 60% of them will say, yeah, maybe that'd be a good idea, even though you just told them that there's absolutely no risk to them as a human in terms of consumption. So we know, just like the H1N1 experience that you referenced from several years ago, that consumers will then have doubt, right? Because we know how the press will, how the unfriendly press, the national press will run with this, right? They already call it pig Ebola. They call it flu instead of African swine fever. They will use the sensationalism of that happen if that were to occur in the U.S., and that will affect consumer confidence. And so what we have is we have a series of videos that are created that not only retail partners, grocery stores, food service, but also our industry will be able to use, and that we'll put on a national campaign that will be a medical doctor, right, pediatrician, who will get on and talk about that there's no risk, a nutritionist, a dietitian, other academics, other respected individuals. We've already got the videos that will be ready to go if that should happen, right, to try to stem that information and try to turn that as quickly as possible. But there's no doubt that there will be an impact just from the fact that it occurred, even though the information will be out there that there's no risk to consumers. So now, we've actually started some of that messaging. So there's about 4 videos that are available on our website. If you would go to pork.org and you would type in ASF, you would be able to get to these 4 basic videos that just talk about it in kind of a more broad brush as kind of informational. But the campaign will be significantly ramped up with many more channels for getting that message out. We anticipate that campaign could cost as much as $13 million. And so our board has set aside a significant amount of dollars, and we're also hopeful that other commodities, other groups will come in and support us in that campaign. But it is a real risk. People will overreact in this country for a period of time. So thank you for the question.
A question for you back here.
Yeah.
So we're hearing a little bit about what I call fake meats.
Oh, yeah.
And obviously some of that coming into the market. Are some of the efforts going to combat some of that message and what the pork industry is doing as a counter?
Yeah, so at the Swine Industry Conference that was in Kalahari last week, which 800 pork producers from across the country, the topics were ASF and alternative meats. That's all anybody really wanted to talk about. So there were other things talked about, there were other topics. They talked about ASF and they talked about alternative meats. So I've talked about ASF, now let's talk about alternative meats. So alternative meats are really two different categories, right? You have the vegetable-based product that's currently on the market, and then you have this cultured cell-based gunk, right, that they're going to try to push as meat. So what is the industry doing? I say gunk, so yeah, now you kind of know where I stand on this, but no surprise. But so what's the industry doing about that? So first of all, MPPC, on your behalf, on all our behalf, is making sure that as these products come forward, that the testing and expectations of them are every bit as rigorous in terms of product safety, testing, knowing what's in the product, that it's actually led by USDA. It's currently a combination of USDA and FDA that will actually oversee these products. But MPPC is doing everything they can to make sure that there's a level playing field and that there's no shortcuts for these alternative products, right? So that's one. They got to meet rigorous testing and the expectation that we know what's in it. What we're doing from a pork checkoff side is we're getting samples of all these products and we're finding out what's the nutritional value, what's in them, what they have that pork does, what meat doesn't have, right? And so we're never going to be disparaging about it from a checkoff perspective, right? Because we know the egg people got in trouble for that a few years ago, right? When they were disparaging about alternative mayonnaise. It caused a lot of trouble. So, but we're darn sure going to make sure that consumers know the difference. And when you put up the list of ingredients that makes up a alternative protein versus something that just says meat or pork, right? And with consumers wanting clean labels and wanting to know what's in that product, I think we've got a really strong leg to stand on in terms of making that differentiation about a highly processed product versus straight out protein meat, right? And so there's a lot of noise about it right now. There's a lot of there's a lot of venture capital that's going behind it. That's fine. Let them work, but we think we're in a pretty good place to be able to convince our consumer about which is a better choice. So there is effort going on both on the policy side through MPPC as well as on the checkoff side. Other questions? If not, I just, again, want to thank you for the invitation to be here. These community colleges, technical schools across the country are a great opportunity for us to get, for the labor that we need within this expanding industry. I'm excited about the program here and that they have in animal science and agriculture. We need to continue to have awareness, get awareness back to our young people, both in high schools as well as community colleges and universities, about the great opportunities that exist in our industry. You're going to continue to see us work that and continue to provide you resources to try to help support that labor effort as we go forward. And with that, I really appreciate the opportunity to be here in Nebraska, because this is a great way for me to have spent this day. So thank you so much.